teacher humiliates black student, regrets it when she learns who his father is. It was a sunny morning at Oakwood High School, and the golden rays of sunshine streamed through the large windows, casting a warm glow across the classroom. Students settled into their seats, chatting quietly and flipping through their textbooks, ready for another day of classes. Among them was Lucas, a smart and dedicated student who often felt invisible in the midst of the attention others received. He sat at the back of the room, his head buried in a book, trying to focus on the words rather than the bustling atmosphere around him. Before we can continue, if you love your family, subscribe to this channel to help up creating amazing stories. Now, let's continue. Lucas was the type of student who put in extra effort to understand the material. He loved science and mathematics, spending countless hours after school in the library, poring over textbooks and solving complex problems. Despite his academic prowess, he felt overlooked, often overshadowed by more outgoing classmates who thrived in the spotlight. Today, as he glanced around, he noticed the usual cliques forming, popular kids laughing together, athletes joking around, and a few artists sketching in the corners. He sighed, feeling a familiar pang of loneliness. The bell rang, signaling the start of first period. Mrs. Martins, known for her strictness and no-nonsense attitude, entered the classroom with a stern expression. Today, she seemed particularly tense, her eyes scanning the room as if searching for trouble. Lucas could feel the tension radiating from her, making the air feel thick with apprehension. He shifted in his seat, trying to blend into the background as much as possible. "Good morning, class," Mrs. Martins began, her voice crisp and authoritative. "Today, we have a lot to cover, so I expect your full attention. No distractions." Her gaze landed on a group of students in the front row who had been whispering to each other. "I'm looking at you, Jessica and Ryan. This is not the time for socializing." The two students immediately straightened up, their expressions shifting from amusement to embarrassment. Lucas felt a flicker of sympathy for them. He remembered the days when he used to be part of the chatter, but that seemed like a lifetime ago. He had chosen to focus on his studies, prioritizing his grades over social interactions, and it often left him feeling isolated. As Mrs. Martins launched into her lecture on the principles of physics, Lucas tried to concentrate. She spoke passionately about Newton's laws, drawing diagrams on the whiteboard while the other students took notes. Lucas admired her dedication. He knew she genuinely cared about her subject. Yet, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was merely a spectator in his own life, watching the world around him without fully participating. A sudden noise interrupted his thoughts, a loud crash from the front of the classroom. Lucas looked up just in time to see a stack of books topple over, sending papers flying everywhere. Laughter erupted from the students, and Mrs. Martin's face turned an alarming shade of red. "Who did that?" she demanded, her voice sharp and cutting through the laughter like a knife. "It wasn't me," Jessica exclaimed, holding up her hands defensively. "I swear, I didn't touch anything. I didn't see anything," Ryan added, trying to defuse the situation. Lucas watched as chaos ensued. Mrs. Martins's strict demeanor had vanished, replaced by frustration. The class fell silent as she scanned the room for a culprit. For a brief moment, Lucas thought about speaking up, but fear held him back. What if she blamed him for causing the ruckus? He preferred to remain unnoticed, hoping that the attention would shift away from the commotion. Finally, after several tense moments, Mrs. Martin sighed, her shoulders slumping. "All right, let's clean up this mess and move on," she said, her voice losing some of its edge. The students began to help pick up the scattered papers, and the classroom buzzed with conversation once more. Lucas felt a flicker of relief wash over him. He resumed his focus, scribbling notes diligently as the lecture continued. As the day progressed, Lucas found himself lost in the rhythm of classes, math, history, and English. He enjoyed learning, but each passing moment heightened his sense of invisibility. During lunch, he took his usual spot at a corner table, pulling out his lunchbox filled with sandwiches and fruit. He watched as his classmates gathered in groups, their laughter ringing through the cafeteria. "Hey, Lucas. Mind if we join you?" The sudden voice pulled him from his thoughts. He looked up to see Mia and Jake, 2 students from his chemistry class, standing at his table. Lucas was taken aback. He hadn't expected anyone to approach him. Sure, he stammered, trying to mask his surprise with a smile. Mia and Jake slid into the seats across from him, their trays laden with food. Did you finish the chemistry assignment? Jake asked, taking a bite of his sandwich. Yeah, I did, Lucas replied, feeling a mix of excitement and anxiety. I found the reactions pretty interesting.
Mia grinned.
Same. I actually had a question about that last part. Could you explain it to me? Lucas nodded eagerly, feeling a rush of warmth at being included in their conversation. As they discussed the assignment, he realized how much he enjoyed sharing his knowledge. For the first time that day, he felt like he belonged. Their conversation flowed easily, and Lucas found himself laughing and sharing ideas without hesitation. The lunchtime chatter around them faded into a distant hum as they focused on their discussion. Mia's enthusiasm was infectious, and he felt his confidence growing. After lunch, as they headed back to class, Mia turned to Lucas. Hey, I was wondering if you'd like to study together for the upcoming exam. I could really use your help. Lucas's heart raced at the invitation. Sure. That sounds great, he replied, trying to contain his excitement. Awesome. How about we meet at the library after school? Jake suggested, and Lucas eagerly agreed. He couldn't believe how quickly the day had turned around. Just a few hours ago, he had felt invisible, and now he had plans with friends. Later that afternoon, Lucas made his way to the library, feeling a mixture of anticipation and nerves. He found a quiet table in the back, surrounded by shelves of books, and set up his materials. As he waited for Mia and Jake to arrive, he flipped through his chemistry notes, trying to prepare himself. When they finally walked in, Mia waved excitedly. Hey, Lucas, she called out, her smile brightening the room. Jake followed closely behind, carrying a stack of textbooks.
Hey.
Thanks for coming, Lucas replied, returning her smile. They settled into their seats, and Lucas could feel the energy in the room shift as they started discussing chemistry concepts. Mia asked questions, and Lucas explained his thought process, feeling a surge of confidence as he realized how much he truly understood. They worked through practice problems together, and as the hours flew by, Lucas found himself laughing and enjoying the study session. This is actually fun, Mia exclaimed, her enthusiasm contagious. Lucas nodded in agreement, feeling a sense of camaraderie that had been missing from his school life. As they continued to study, Lucas found himself opening up more. He shared stories about his love for science, his favorite experiments, and how he hoped to pursue a career in engineering someday. Mia and Jake listened intently, sharing their own dreams and aspirations. I've always wanted to work in environmental science, Mia said, her eyes shining with passion. I want to help find solutions to climate change and protect our planet. Wow, that's really cool, Lucas responded, impressed. I never thought about that side of science. Jake chimed in, I'm more into technology. I'm hoping to design innovative solutions for everyday problems. Maybe we can all work together someday. The discussion flowed seamlessly, and for the first time, Lucas felt like he was part of a team. The camaraderie between them felt real, and he relished every moment. However, not everything was smooth sailing. The next day, as Lucas walked into his first class, he overheard a group of students whispering and giggling. He tried to brush it off, but as he approached his seat, he caught snippets of their conversation. Did you see Lucas? He thinks he's so smart because he's studying with Mia and Jake. One of the girls sneered, her voice dripping with disdain. Like that's going to make him popular. Lucas's heart sank. He quickly sat down, trying to disappear into his desk. It stung to hear those words, but he reminded himself that he was making progress with his friends. He didn't want to let their negativity affect him, but the familiar feeling of isolation crept back in. As Mrs. Martins entered the room, Lucas took a deep breath, forcing himself to focus on the lesson. But the whispers lingered in the back of his mind, a constant reminder of how easily things could shift. Later that week, Lucas received an email from Mia. Hey, I was thinking we should have another study session. What do you think? The message filled him with warmth, and he quickly replied, suggesting they meet again. On the day of the study session, as they gathered at the library, Lucas felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. He knew he had to shake off the negativity from school and focus on the positive aspects of his friendships. "Hey, Lucas." Mia greeted him with a smile. "Ready to tackle this exam?" "Absolutely," he replied, forcing a smile, even though his heart felt heavy. As they worked through problems, Lucas noticed that Mia seemed a bit distant. "Are you okay?" he asked, concerned. "I've been thinking about what some of the other students said," Mia admitted, looking down at her notes. "It bothers me that they think our friendship is just about schoolwork." Lucas felt a rush of empathy. "I know how you feel. Sometimes I feel like I don't fit in anywhere," he confessed, opening up about his struggles with feeling invisible. "I get it," Mia said, her expression softening. "But I really value our friendship. I think we should stand strong together against the negativity." Lucas felt a wave of relief wash over him. "Yeah, we can definitely do that," he said, smiling. "Let's not let anyone else bring us down." With renewed determination, they continued their study session, focusing on their goals and ambitions rather than the opinions of others. As they prepared for the exam, they also talked about their dreams and aspirations beyond school, fostering a deeper connection. The day of the chemistry exam arrived, and the atmosphere in the classroom was electric with anxiety. Lucas felt the familiar knot in his stomach, but he reminded himself of the support he had from Mia and Jake. They had studied hard, and he was ready to face the challenge. As the test began, Lucas took a deep breath, focusing on the questions in front of him. He worked methodically through each problem, recalling the concepts they had discussed during their study sessions. With each answer he wrote down, he felt more confident. When the bell rang, signaling the end of the exam, Lucas felt a wave of relief wash over him. He had done his best, and that was what mattered. As he walked out of the classroom, he spotted Mia and Jake waiting for him in the hallway. How do you think you did?" Mia asked, her eyes sparkling with anticipation. "I think I did all right," Lucas replied, grinning. "It was tough, but I felt prepared." "We're proud of you," Jake said, clapping Lucas on the back. "Let's celebrate after school." As the day went on, Lucas felt a renewed sense of belonging. He was no longer the invisible student sitting in the back of the classroom. He had friends who valued him for who he was, and he was ready to embrace it. In the weeks that followed, Lucas continued to grow in confidence and friendship. He and Mia began collaborating on science projects, their mutual passion for learning strengthening their bond. They even initiated a small study group that welcomed others, creating an inclusive atmosphere where everyone felt comfortable asking questions. As the school year progressed, Lucas noticed a change not only in himself, but in the dynamics of their class. With Mia and Jake by his side, he felt empowered to speak up during discussions, sharing his insights without fear of judgment. His classmates began to recognize him as someone who had valuable contributions to make. During one particularly challenging project, Lucas found himself at the forefront, leading discussions and guiding his peers through complex concepts. The experience was exhilarating, and he could feel the support of his friends behind him. No longer did he feel like an outsider. He was now an integral part of the classroom community. As the school year drew to a close, Lucas reflected on how far he had come. The shy, invisible student he once was had transformed into a confident young man ready to face the world. He had forged friendships that would last beyond the walls of Oakwood High, and he felt a sense of belonging he had never experienced before. As the final bell rang on the last day of school, Lucas stood outside with Mia and Jake, their laughter echoing in the summer air. "Can you believe we made it through?" Mia exclaimed, her eyes bright with excitement. "Yeah, and we did it together," Lucas replied, a broad smile spreading across his face. As they made plans for the summer, Lucas realized that he had found his place at Oakwood High School. He was no longer the invisible student. He had become part of a vibrant community that embraced him for who he was. And as he looked to the future, he felt hopeful and excited about the possibilities that lay ahead, ready to embrace new challenges with the friends who had stood by his side. In the end, Lucas learned that the journey to finding one's place was not just about fitting in, but about building connections and embracing the unique qualities that made him who he was. He had turned his experience of feeling invisible into a powerful narrative of growth, resilience, and the beauty of friendship. And that, he realized, was the true essence of belonging. During math class, Mrs. Martins decided it was the perfect moment for a demonstration. She called Lucas to the board, but when he hesitated, she grew frustrated. "Why don't you pay attention? You can't keep being a failure." The classroom fell silent. Lucas felt his face burn with humiliation as his classmates exchanged nervous glances. The embarrassment was overwhelming, and he couldn't find the words to defend himself.
Lucas had always struggled with math.
No matter how hard he tried, the numbers never seemed to make sense. The fear of being called to the board was always at the back of his mind, and now it had come true. He could feel the weight of Mrs. Martin's words pressing down on him like a heavy blanket, suffocating and hard to shake off. He looked at his classmates, who were watching him with a mix of pity and judgment, and the sense of isolation grew deeper. He wanted to disappear. He wanted to be anywhere but here, facing the cruel reality of being the target of a teacher's frustration. The whispers that sometimes circulated among his peers, the mocking laughter during group projects when he couldn't follow along, everything came crashing down on him in that moment. He turned back to the board, staring blankly at the math problem. Numbers and letters danced before his eyes, taunting him. As he stood there, he noticed Mia in the corner of the classroom. She was his friend, someone who had always supported him, but even her usual encouraging smile seemed to falter. Lucas felt a pang of regret for dragging her into his struggles. He wished he could be better, for her sake and for his own. Finally, he took a deep breath and approached the board, his heart racing. He picked up the chalk, but his hand trembled as he attempted to write down the first step of the problem. The chalk squeaked against the board, and he could hear the soft whispers of his classmates behind him, their eyes boring into his back. The pressure felt unbearable. "Lucas, focus. You need to think." Mrs. Martin snapped, her voice cutting through his thoughts like a knife. He flinched at her tone, and a rush of frustration and sadness surged within him. Why couldn't she understand how hard he was trying? In that moment, he felt something shift inside him. A small flicker of determination ignited, fueled by the anger of being misunderstood. He remembered the late nights he had spent studying, the countless hours of practicing problems, only to still feel lost. He thought about all the times he had to push himself to keep going, even when it felt like the world was against him. With renewed resolve, Lucas squared his shoulders and focused on the problem. He started writing, the chalk gliding across the board as he broke the steps down in his mind. The numbers started to come together, and slowly he began to regain his confidence. Each stroke of chalk was a declaration that he was not a failure. The classroom fell silent as he worked through the problem, his classmates watching him with a mix of surprise and curiosity. Lucas could feel the heat of embarrassment still lingering in his cheeks, but now it was accompanied by a spark of pride. He could do this. He could show them, and himself, that he was capable. After a few minutes, Lucas stepped back, surveying his work. He had solved the problem, and even though he was still nervous, there was a sense of accomplishment swelling within him. He turned to face the class, his heart racing as he spoke. "I know I'm not great at math, but I'm trying. I'm not a failure, and I won't give up." Murmurs rippled through the room. Mia beamed at him, and Lucas caught her eye, feeling a rush of gratitude. He had fought against the tide of negativity, and for the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of hope. Mrs. Martin's expression softened slightly, though she quickly masked it with a stern look. "Well, that's better, Lucas. Just remember, hard work pays off. Now sit down." As Lucas returned to his seat, he could feel a shift in the atmosphere. The tension that had filled the room moments before had dissipated, replaced by a sense of camaraderie. His classmates whispered to one another, and he could sense that some of them respected him for standing up to the challenge. After class, Mia approached him. "You were amazing, Lucas. I can't believe how you handled that. I'm so proud of you." Lucas smiled, his heart swelling with appreciation. "Thanks, Mia. I didn't want to let her get to me anymore. I want to be better. Don't doubt yourself, she said, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. You're already better than you think. As the days passed, Lucas carried the memory of that moment with him. He worked harder in math, studying with Mia and Jake during lunch and after school. They formed a small study group where everyone could ask questions and support one another without judgment. Slowly but surely, Lucas began to improve. The concepts that once seemed foreign started to click, and he found himself grasping the material more confidently. His relationship with Mia blossomed as they spent more time together, bonding over their shared struggles and victories. They laughed and encouraged each other, creating a safe space where they could both express their frustrations and celebrate their progress. Lucas appreciated how Mia always pushed him to see his strengths, reminding him of his capabilities whenever self-doubt crept in. However, the lingering sting of Mrs. Martin's words still haunted him at times. He could feel the shadows of insecurity lurking, threatening to pull him back into a spiral of negativity. But Lucas was determined not to let that happen. He focused on the positive feedback he received from Mia and Jake, reminding himself that he was not defined by one moment or by someone else's opinion. One day, as they were preparing for a math quiz, Lucas felt particularly anxious. He paced back and forth in the hallway, his mind racing with thoughts of doubt. What if he failed? What if Mrs. Martins criticized him again? Just as panic began to overwhelm him, he heard Mia's voice calling from behind him. Hey, Lucas. You okay? He turned to see her jogging toward him, her face filled with concern. Yeah, just a little nervous, he admitted, running a hand through his hair. She stopped in front of him, her eyes locking onto his. You've got this. Remember all the hard work you've put in? You're ready. Just breathe and take it one question at a time. Her confidence in him was like a lifeline. Lucas took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his anxiety lift slightly. Thanks, Mia. I really needed that. They walked into the classroom together, and as Lucas took his seat, he felt a sense of determination rising within him. He was no longer the student who shrank in fear. He was someone who had faced challenges head-on and was ready to embrace whatever came next. The quiz began, and Lucas focused on each question, recalling the techniques and strategies they had practiced. As he wrote down his answers, a sense of calm washed over him. He was proud of how far he had come and grateful for the support of his friends. When the bell rang to signal the end of the quiz, Lucas felt a surge of relief. He had done his best, and that was all that mattered. After class, Mia and Jake rushed over to him, their faces lit up with excitement. How do you think you did? Jake asked, his eyes sparkling with enthusiasm. I feel good about it. I think I finally understood the material, Lucas replied, his confidence growing. Mia grinned widely. I told you, you've come such a long way. As they celebrated their progress together, Lucas couldn't help but feel a sense of belonging. The fear of being judged had started to fade, replaced by a strong bond of friendship that supported his growth. He knew that no matter the outcome of the quiz, he had friends who believed in him, and that made all the difference. Weeks passed, and the school year continued to unfold. Lucas found himself excelling not only in math, but in other subjects as well. He became more active in class discussions and even participated in group projects without the crippling anxiety that once held him back. He felt more connected to his peers, enjoying the sense of community that had developed within their small group. One day, while studying for an upcoming math test, Lucas received a text from Mia. Hey, let's do a study session after school. I think we can help each other ace this test. Lucas felt a rush of excitement at the idea of spending more time with Mia and Jake, strengthening their bond even further. That afternoon, they gathered in the school library. Books and notes spread out around them. The atmosphere was lively and filled with laughter as they tackled practice problems and quizzed each other. Lucas felt a sense of camaraderie as they encouraged one another, celebrating each small victory along the way. As they worked, Mia shared her plans for the upcoming summer. I was thinking of joining a summer camp for math enrichment. It could be a great way to continue learning and meet new people, she said enthusiastically. Lucas felt a twinge of excitement at the thought. That sounds awesome. I'd love to join you if you don't mind. Of course, the more, the merrier, Mia replied, her eyes sparkling with joy. As the school year drew to a close, Lucas reflected on how much he had grown. He no longer felt like an outsider. He was part of a community that embraced him for who he was. He had faced his fears and emerged stronger, more confident, and eager to learn. The day of the final math exam arrived, and Lucas sat in his seat, heart pounding in anticipation. But instead of fear, he felt a wave of excitement. He was ready. The memories of that day in class, standing at the board, filled him with determination. He wasn't just taking a test. He was proving to himself that he could succeed. When the exam was over, Lucas left the classroom with a smile on his face. He had done his best, and that was all he could ask for. As he walked through the hallways, he felt a sense of pride and gratitude for the journey he had undertaken. Mia and Jake were waiting for him outside, their faces lit up with enthusiasm. How do you think you did?" Jake asked, his eyes glimmering with hope. "I think I did great," Lucas replied, beaming with confidence. Mia clapped her hands in excitement. "I knew you would. Let's celebrate." As they headed out together, Lucas felt a sense of belonging wash over him. He had transformed from a shy, anxious student into someone who embraced challenges head-on, surrounded by friends who uplifted and supported him. He knew that whatever lay ahead, he was ready to face it, armed with the knowledge that he could overcome anything with hard work, determination, and the unwavering support of his friends. After class, the bullying didn't stop. Classmates began to mock him, imitating the teacher's harsh tone. "Why don't you pay attention? You can't keep being a failure," they taunted, their voices dripping with sarcasm. Lucas felt isolated and distressed, a deep sense of loneliness settling in his chest like a heavy stone. He couldn't understand why Mrs. Martins had singled him out for her frustration. What started as a normal day had turned into a nightmare, and he felt like the walls were closing in around him. Lucas walked the halls, head down, avoiding eye contact. The laughter and whispers of his peers echoed in his mind, making it hard to concentrate on anything else. Each snicker felt like a dagger, reminding him of how he had faltered in front of the entire class. The mockery felt relentless, and as he hurried past groups of students, he could hear their hushed conversations shift toward him, like a spotlight shining down on his misery. His heart raced as he sought a refuge from the harsh reality of his school day. He made his way to the library, a place he often found solace. It was quieter there, a sanctuary filled with a comforting scent of old books and the promise of escape within their pages. As he entered, he was greeted by the familiar sight of rows upon rows of shelves, each one lined with stories waiting to be discovered. Lucas loved the library. Here, he could immerse himself in different worlds, far removed from the cruelty he faced outside. He wandered through the aisles, running his fingers along the spines of books, feeling the texture of their covers. He pulled out a fantasy novel that had caught his eye, the vibrant cover depicting a majestic dragon soaring above a castle. He found a cozy corner and sank into a plush armchair, the soft fabric enveloping him like a warm hug. As he flipped through the pages, the words began to transport him away from his troubles. In this new world, he was no longer the target of ridicule. He was a brave knight on a quest to save a kingdom, wielding a sword with confidence and strength. With every turn of the page, the laughter of his classmates faded into the background, replaced by the exhilarating thrill of adventure. But no matter how hard he tried to immerse himself in the story, the weight of his reality kept tugging at the corners of his mind. The humiliation he felt in class lingered like a shadow, refusing to be banished completely. He thought about how Mrs. Martins had made him feel so small, like he didn't belong. Lucas's heart ached at the thought of how easily she had dismissed him, her words echoing painfully in his mind. As he read, he glanced up from the book occasionally, observing the other students in the library. Some were studying diligently, while others laughed and shared jokes. A group of girls nearby were discussing a popular TV show, their voices bubbling with excitement. Lucas envied their camaraderie and ease, wishing he could find a place within their circle. but the fear of being judged or ridiculed again held him back. Minutes turned into hours as Lucas lost himself in the story. It wasn't until he felt a gentle tap on his shoulder that he was pulled back to reality. Startled, he turned to see Mia standing beside him, her expression filled with concern. "Hey, Lucas. I was looking for you. Are you okay?" He hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to answer. Yeah, I'm fine," he replied, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Mia, however, wasn't convinced. She knew Lucas well enough to see through his facade. "You don't look fine.
I saw what happened in class."
That was really unfair of Mrs. Martin's, and I'm sorry you had to go through that. Lucas felt a lump form in his throat at her kindness. "Thanks, Mia. It just really hurt, you know? I didn't understand why she singled me out like that." Mia nodded, her expression softening. "Teachers can be tough sometimes, but that doesn't mean you're a failure. You're one of the smartest people I know. You just have to find the way that works for you." Her words were like a balm for his wounded heart. "It's hard when it feels like everyone is watching, and I can't seem to get it right," Lucas admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "Hey, let's not focus on them. You've been working hard, and it shows. Why don't we go study together? We can help each other out." "You won't have to do it alone," she suggested, her eyes shining with encouragement. Lucas considered her offer, a flicker of hope igniting within him. The idea of studying together felt comforting. "That sounds nice," he said, a small smile breaking through the cloud of sadness that had engulfed him. Mia grinned and extended her hand. "Come on then. We can grab some snacks from the cafeteria and head back to the library. I brought some of my notes, and I think they might help." Feeling grateful for her friendship, Lucas took her hand and followed her out of the library. As they walked through the bustling hallways, he noticed that the laughter and chatter around him didn't feel as threatening. Instead, it felt like a distant hum, a background noise that faded as he focused on the warmth of Mia's presence beside him. In the cafeteria, they picked up a few snacks, some fruit, granola bars, and a couple of bottles of water. The bright lights and lively atmosphere were a stark contrast to the quiet of the library, but Lucas felt a sense of belonging as he sat with Mia at a small table. They shared laughs as they snacked, discussing their favorite books and movies, gradually easing the tension that had built up over the past few hours. Mia was like a breath of fresh air, and Lucas couldn't help but feel grateful for her presence. After finishing their snacks, they made their way back to the library, where they settled at a table filled with textbooks and notes. Mia pulled out her math textbook, and Lucas grabbed his, feeling a sense of determination. As they began to study, Lucas found himself absorbing the material in a way he hadn't before. Mia explained concepts patiently, breaking them down step by step.
"See?
It's not about being perfect. It's about understanding the process." "You've got this," she said, her enthusiasm contagious. Lucas nodded, feeling more confident with each passing moment. The numbers and equations began to take shape in his mind, no longer a jumble of confusion. With Mia's help, he tackled practice problems, and as he solved each one, a sense of accomplishment washed over him. The hours slipped by, and soon the library began to empty as the school day drew to a close. Lucas looked up from his notes, his heart racing with excitement. "I think I actually understand this. I can't believe it." Mia's face lit up with pride. "I told you. You just needed a little support. You're really capable, Lucas. I knew you had it in you." Feeling a rush of gratitude, Lucas smiled genuinely for the first time that day. "Thanks for believing in me, Mia. I really needed this. I was feeling so lost earlier." As they packed up their things, Lucas felt a renewed sense of hope. The bond he had formed with Mia not only provided comfort, but also gave him the strength to confront his fears. He realized he didn't have to navigate this challenging journey alone. He had a friend by his side who would support him through thick and thin. Outside, the sun was beginning to set, casting a warm glow over the school grounds. As they walked toward the exit, Lucas felt lighter, as though a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. The laughter and teasing of his classmates no longer felt like an insurmountable barrier. He had found his strength, and it was bolstered by the support of his friend. "Hey, Want to join me at the park after school tomorrow? Mia asked, breaking him from his thoughts. I think it'll be nice to relax and hang out. Lucas felt a surge of happiness. I'd love that. It'll be nice to just take a break and enjoy some fresh air. They exchanged smiles, and as they said their goodbyes, Lucas felt a sense of belonging that had eluded him for so long. He had found not only a friend in Mia, but also a sense of confidence within himself. The next day, as he walked into class, Lucas felt different. He held his head a little higher, the sting of Mrs. Martin's words still present but no longer defining him. He was prepared to face the challenges ahead, buoyed by the knowledge that he had a friend who believed in him and who would be there to help him navigate the ups and downs of school life. As math class began, he noticed Mrs. Martin's moving around the room, distributing assignments. When she approached him, he braced himself, unsure of what to expect. Lucas, I hope you've been reviewing your material, she said, her voice stern yet not unkind. Yes, I have, he replied, surprising himself with the steadiness in his voice. She raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical, but something in her expression shifted, as if she noticed the determination radiating from him.
Good.
I expect to see improvement. The challenge hung in the air between them, and instead of feeling defeated, Lucas felt a spark of resolve igniting within him. He was ready to prove himself, not just to Mrs. Martin's, but to himself as well. After class, he met Mia in the hallway, excitement bubbling within him. I'm going to work hard this week. I want to show Mrs. Martin's that I can do this. That's the spirit, she cheered, her eyes sparkling with encouragement. I'll be right here with you. Let's tackle this together. As they walked to their next class, Lucas couldn't help but smile. He was no longer alone in his struggles. He had a friend who understood and supported him. And with that realization, he felt empowered to embrace the challenges ahead, ready to turn the page and start a new chapter in his life. That same day, Lucas's father, Dr. Silva, a respected lawyer in their community, was informed about what had happened at school. When he received the call from Lucas, describing the humiliating experience he endured in Mrs. Martin's math class, a wave of anger washed over him. He felt an overwhelming urge to protect his son, who he believed deserved better than to be singled out and ridiculed. Furious at the unjust treatment of his son, Dr. Silva decided he wouldn't let this incident pass without addressing it. He had always emphasized the importance of education, respect, and integrity in their family, and he was determined to confront the situation head-on. After all, Lucas was not just a student. He was a bright young man with dreams and potential, and he had the right to feel safe and respected in his learning environment. After finishing his work at the office, Dr. Silva suited up, adjusting his tie as he mentally prepared himself for what lay ahead. He knew the school system could be resistant to change, especially when it came to addressing the behavior of teachers. However, he believed in standing up for what was right, and he was ready to advocate for his son. Arriving at Oakwood High School, Dr. Silva strode through the halls with purpose. The familiar smell of polished floors and chalk dust filled the air, but today, it felt different to him. The chatter of students, once a comforting background noise, now seemed like a reminder of the injustice Lucas had faced. As he approached the office, he spotted the principal, Mr. Thompson, and decided to speak with him first. Mr. Thompson, do you have a moment? Dr. Silva asked, his voice firm but calm. Of course, Dr. Silva. What brings you here today? Mr. Thompson replied, his brows furrowing slightly at the serious tone. Dr. Silva took a deep breath, collecting his thoughts. I'm here to discuss an incident involving my son, Lucas, and his math teacher, Mrs. Martin's. I believe he was treated unfairly in her class today, and I'd like to address the matter directly. The principal's expression shifted, concern etched across his face. I see. Please, let's go to my office and discuss this further. As they walked down the corridor, Dr. Silva felt a mix of determination and anxiety. He knew that addressing issues like these could be sensitive, but he was committed to advocating for Lucas. Once inside the principal's office, Dr. Silva sat down, straightening his posture, and began to recount the events of the day. Lucas called me earlier, upset about how Mrs. Martin singled him out during math class. He mentioned that she made a derogatory comment, suggesting that he was a failure. I'm concerned about the impact this could have on his self-esteem and motivation, Dr. Silva explained, his voice steady. Mr. Thompson nodded, taking notes as Dr. Silva spoke. I understand your concerns, and I appreciate you bringing this to my attention. We take matters of student welfare very seriously here at Oakwood. I will certainly look into this situation. Dr. Silva continued, it's not just about Lucas. It's about creating a safe and supportive environment for all students. Teachers have a responsibility to encourage and uplift their students, not to belittle them. I'm hoping we can address this issue constructively. After a moment of silence, Mr. Thompson replied, I completely agree. It's important that we maintain a respectful atmosphere in our classrooms. I will speak with Mrs. Martins and gather more information about what transpired. However, I would also like to set up a meeting with you, Lucas, and Mrs. Martins to discuss this openly. Dr. Silva nodded, appreciating the principal's willingness to address the issue directly. That sounds reasonable. I believe it's essential for Lucas to express how he felt during that interaction. As their discussion progressed, Dr. Silva felt a sense of relief wash over him. He had taken the first step in advocating for his son, and now they could work toward finding a resolution. He left the principal's office with a newfound hope, knowing that he was doing everything he could to support Lucas. Meanwhile, Lucas was at home, trying to shake off the remnants of the day. He had confided in Mia about his father's plan to confront the school. While he felt a mix of emotions, relief that his father was taking action, yet anxiety about the potential confrontation, Mia remained optimistic. Your dad is doing the right thing, Lucas. It's important that teachers understand how their words can affect us. Maybe this will help not just you, but other students too, she encouraged, her eyes bright with conviction. Lucas nodded, taking solace in her words. I hope so. I just want to feel like I belong, and that I can do well in school without feeling afraid. The next day, the meeting was set. Dr. Silva, Lucas, and Mr. Thompson were joined by Mrs. Martins in the principal's office. The air was thick with tension as they settled into their chairs, each person acutely aware of the gravity of the conversation about to unfold. Thank you all for coming, Mr. Thompson began, his tone authoritative yet calm. Today, we are here to discuss the recent incident involving Lucas in your class, Mrs. Martins. Lucas shifted nervously in his seat, glancing at his father, who offered a reassuring nod. He felt the weight of everyone's gaze, especially Mrs. Martins, who seemed to be bracing herself for the confrontation. I understand that there was a comment made in class that upset Lucas, and I'd like to hear from both sides, Mr. Thompson continued, looking directly at Mrs. Martins. The teacher cleared her throat, her expression shifting from defensiveness to a more open demeanor. I did call Lucas to the board, and I admit I was frustrated when he hesitated. I might have been harsher than necessary, but my intention was to motivate him to participate more actively in class. Dr. Silva interjected, his voice firm yet respectful. Mrs. Martins, while I understand that teaching can be challenging, it's crucial to remember that our words carry weight. Lucas is a bright student, but he needs encouragement, not humiliation. Comments that label him as a failure can have lasting effects on his confidence and willingness to engage. Lucas felt a surge of emotion at his father's words. It was empowering to hear him advocate so passionately for him. He took a deep breath, preparing to speak up himself. I just wanted to say that I was really nervous in class, and instead of feeling supported, I felt embarrassed. I want to do well, but when I'm made to feel like I'm failing, it makes it even harder. Mrs. Martins looked at him, her expression softening.
I'm truly sorry, Lucas.
I didn't mean to make you feel that way. I realize now that I could have handled the situation differently. I want to support you, not discourage you. The conversation continued, with Lucas expressing his feelings and sharing his experiences in the classroom. Mr. Thompson facilitated the discussion, ensuring that everyone had the opportunity to share their perspectives. By the end of the meeting, something shifted in the room. There was a palpable sense of understanding and respect that hadn't been there before. Dr. Silva felt proud of Lucas for standing up for himself and expressing his feelings so articulately. As they left the office, Lucas felt lighter. A weight lifted from his shoulders. He realized that confronting difficult situations could lead to positive change, not just for himself, but for others as well. His father put a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You did great, Lucas. I'm proud of you for speaking up." "Thanks, Dad. I feel like things might actually get better now," Lucas replied, a smile breaking through his earlier apprehension. As they walked down the hallway together, Lucas felt a renewed sense of hope. The school was still a challenging environment, but he was no longer facing it alone. With the support of his father and the encouragement of friends like Mia, he knew he could overcome the obstacles that lay ahead. The next day in math class, Lucas walked in with a sense of determination. He sat down at his desk, ready to tackle whatever challenges awaited him. Mrs. Martins entered the room, her demeanor noticeably different. She smiled warmly at the class, and Lucas felt a flicker of optimism. "Good morning, everyone. I hope you're ready to dive into today's lesson. I want to start by saying that I value each of you and your contributions to our class," she began, her tone more encouraging. Lucas exchanged glances with Mia, both of them silently acknowledging the change in the atmosphere. As the lesson progressed, he found himself engaging more, raising his hand to answer questions and even asking for clarification on challenging topics. Mrs. Martins noticed his efforts and encouraged him with praise. "Great job, Lucas. Keep it up. You're really grasping these concepts." With each positive interaction, Lucas felt his confidence grow. The teasing from his classmates began to fade into the background, replaced by the supportive environment that was slowly being cultivated in the classroom. The weeks that followed were transformative for Lucas. With the support of his father and the encouragement from Mrs. Martins, he began to thrive academically. He found himself looking forward to math class instead of dreading it. Mia remained a steadfast friend, joining him for study sessions and celebrating his successes.
"See?
I told you it would get better," she exclaimed after Lucas aced a math quiz. Lucas beamed with pride, realizing that he had overcome not just the challenges in class, but also the insecurities that had held him back. He learned that it was okay to ask for help and that advocating for himself was a sign of strength, not weakness. One afternoon, as he was packing his backpack to head home, Lucas overheard a couple of students discussing their struggles with math. Without thinking, he approached them. "Hey, I know math can be tough. If you need any help, I'd be happy to study with you." The students looked surprised but grateful. "Really? That would be awesome," one of them replied, a smile breaking across their face. In that moment, Lucas realized that he had not only found his voice, but he also had the power to uplift others in the process. He had transformed from the boy who felt invisible to someone who could make a difference, however small it might seem. As he walked home that day, Lucas felt a sense of pride in himself. He knew that challenges would always be a part of life, but he had learned to face them with courage and resilience. With the support of his father, friends, and even his teacher, he was ready to embrace whatever came next. Lucas was determined to continue his journey, not just for himself, but for others who might feel like they were struggling in silence. He wanted to be a beacon of encouragement, showing that with support and determination, anyone could rise above their challenges and find their place in the world. Upon arriving at the school, Dr. Silva was greeted by the principal, Mr. Thompson, who immediately understood the gravity of the situation. He led Dr. Silva into a conference room where they could speak privately. The walls were lined with motivational posters, and the air smelled faintly of fresh paint, but Dr. Silva was too focused on the matter at hand to notice. He took a seat across from Mr. Thompson, who was already preparing to take notes. "Dr. Silva, thank you for coming on such short notice," Mr. Thompson said, his tone serious yet empathetic. "I understand your son had an unfortunate experience in Mrs. Martin's class yesterday." "Yes, thank you for meeting with me," Dr. Silva replied, his voice steady despite the tension in the room. "I received a call from Lucas describing how he was humiliated in front of his classmates. It's unacceptable, and I want to ensure this doesn't happen again, not just to him, but to any other student." Mr. Thompson nodded, his expression turning grave. "I completely agree. We strive to maintain a safe and supportive environment for all our students. I will address this matter thoroughly. After a brief discussion about the school's policies regarding bullying and teacher-student interactions, Mr. Thompson signaled for Mrs. Martins to come in. Dr. Silva's heart raced as he anticipated the conversation that was about to unfold. He was prepared for a confrontation, but he also hoped it could lead to a resolution. When Mrs. Martins entered the room, she was met with the sight of the principal sitting across from Dr. Silva. She had no idea who Dr. Silva was, but she sensed the seriousness of the atmosphere. As she approached, Mr. Thompson stood and gestured for her to take a seat. Mrs. Martins, this is Dr. Silva, Lucas's father. We need to discuss an incident that occurred in your class yesterday, Mr. Thompson began, maintaining a professional demeanor. Mrs. Martins looked slightly taken aback, but smiled politely. Nice to meet you, Dr. Silva, she said, extending her hand. What seems to be the problem? Dr. Silva introduced himself, shaking her hand firmly. I'm here because my son Lucas was humiliated in your class yesterday. He described a situation where you called him to the board and made a derogatory comment about his abilities. The moment the words left his mouth, Mrs. Martins' expression changed. She had been confident moments ago, but now her composure faltered. The respect and influence of Lucas's father were evident, and she began to sweat nervously. I didn't mean for it to come across that way, she stammered, her voice trembling slightly. Dr. Silva leaned forward, his eyes steady on hers. Regardless of intent, the impact of your words matters. Lucas is a bright student, but he felt belittled in front of his peers, and that can have lasting effects on his confidence and willingness to engage in class. Mrs. Martin shifted in her seat, her hands fidgeting in her lap.
I'm truly sorry, Dr. Silva.
Teaching can be stressful, and I sometimes get frustrated when students don't participate. I didn't intend to hurt Lucas or make him feel inadequate. Mr. Thompson interjected, Mrs. Martins, while we understand that teaching can be challenging, it's vital to approach students with encouragement rather than criticism. We need to foster an environment where students feel safe to express themselves without fear of humiliation. Yes, I understand. I will work on my approach, Mrs. Martins replied, her voice quieter now. She looked at Dr. Silva, her eyes reflecting a mix of regret and concern. I really didn't mean for it to escalate this way. Dr. Silva took a deep breath, wanting to find common ground. I appreciate your willingness to acknowledge the situation. I think it's important for Lucas to know that he can come to you if he feels uncomfortable in the future. Building that bridge will be crucial for his learning experience. Mrs. Martins nodded, her expression softening. Absolutely. I want to support all my students, and I would hate to think that my words have driven a wedge between Lucas and me. Mr. Thompson leaned back in his chair, observing the interaction. I believe it's essential to have a follow-up plan. Perhaps we can set up a meeting with Lucas to discuss how we can improve communication between you and him moving forward. That sounds like a great idea, Dr. Silva replied, appreciating the principal's proactive approach. I want Lucas to feel comfortable in your class and to know that he can reach out for help without fear of ridicule. As they continued to discuss potential strategies for fostering a more positive classroom environment, Dr. Silva felt a sense of hope. He realized that while the situation had been distressing, it also presented an opportunity for growth for both Lucas and Mrs. Martins. After a productive meeting, they agreed to set up a time for Lucas to meet with them. Dr. Silva left the school feeling a mix of relief and determination. He had stood up for his son and had initiated a conversation that could lead to positive changes in the school environment. That evening, Lucas arrived home from school, visibly more relaxed than he had been the previous day. Dr. Silva had a feeling that the meeting would be beneficial for his son. As they sat down for dinner, Dr. Silva decided to share the news. Lucas, I spoke with Mr. Thompson and Mrs. Martins today about what happened in class, he began, observing Lucas closely for his reaction. Lucas looked up from his plate, curiosity flickering in his eyes. What did they say? Dr. Silva took a sip of his water before continuing. They both acknowledged that what happened was unacceptable. Mrs. Martins is willing to work on her approach, and we're going to set up a meeting with you to discuss how you can communicate with her if you ever feel uncomfortable in class. A look of surprise crossed Lucas's face. Really? She wants to talk to me. Yes, she does, Dr. Silva affirmed. It's important for you to feel safe and respected in your classroom. I believe this could be a chance for both of you to understand each other better. Lucas seemed to consider this, a thoughtful expression settling on his face. I guess that could be good. Maybe she just needs to know how I feel. That's exactly right, son. Communication is key, Dr. Silva replied, feeling proud of Lucas's willingness to engage in the process. Over the next few days, the atmosphere in the house shifted as Lucas found himself more at ease. He knew that his father had taken a stand for him, and it gave him the confidence to face his classmates and teachers with renewed vigor. The meeting with Mrs. Martins was scheduled for the following week, and Lucas felt a mix of excitement and nerves as the day approached. When the day finally arrived, Dr. Silva took Lucas to school, providing some last-minute encouragement. Remember, Lucas, you have every right to express how you feel. This is your opportunity to help improve the environment for yourself and other students. I know, Dad. I'll do my best, Lucas replied, determined to approach the meeting with maturity and confidence. As they entered the school, Dr. Silva noticed a shift in Lucas's demeanor. While he had previously felt invisible, today he walked with purpose, his head held high. The experience of standing up for himself had empowered him, and Dr. Silva couldn't have been prouder. In the principal's office, Lucas found himself seated between his father and Mrs. Martins. The atmosphere was tense but hopeful. Mr. Thompson welcomed them and initiated the discussion. Thank you both for coming today. This is an important step in fostering a positive environment at Oakwood. Lucas, we're here to listen to you and help facilitate a productive conversation. With a deep breath, Lucas began, I just want to say that when I was called to the board the other day, I felt really embarrassed. I was nervous about answering, and instead of encouragement, I felt like I was being put on the spot in a bad way. Mrs. Martins listened intently, her expression reflecting genuine concern. Lucas, I appreciate you sharing how you felt. I realize that my words were hurtful, and I'm really sorry for that. I want to support you in your learning. Lucas nodded, grateful for her acknowledgement. Thank you, Mrs. Martins. I know you want us to learn, but sometimes it's hard to speak up in class when you feel like you're going to be judged. Dr. Silva chimed in. That's an important point, and it's something we need to address. It's vital for students to feel safe and supported in expressing themselves. Mrs. Martins, what steps can we take to ensure that all students, including Lucas, feel comfortable participating? Mrs. Martins paused, considering the question carefully. I think I can start by creating a more inclusive environment. I'd like to implement some strategies like allowing students to volunteer before calling on them. Maybe we could also do some group activities that encourage collaboration so students can learn from one another in a supportive setting. That sounds promising, Mr. Thompson responded. Building a collaborative classroom culture can make a significant difference. As they continued to discuss potential strategies, Lucas felt a growing sense of empowerment. He realized that his voice mattered, and he had the ability to contribute to the changes he wanted to see in his classroom. After the meeting, Lucas and his father walked out of the principal's office feeling a sense of accomplishment. They had engaged in a meaningful dialogue that would lead to positive changes not only for Lucas, but for all students in Mrs. Martin's class. As the days turned into weeks, Lucas began to notice the impact of the changes in the classroom. Mrs. Martins was making a conscious effort to foster a more inclusive environment. Students were encouraged to share their thoughts, and group activities became a regular part of the curriculum. Lucas found himself participating more, feeling less anxious about speaking up. The transformation in the classroom wasn't just about academic performance. It was about building relationships. Lucas found new friendships blossoming as he connected with classmates who shared similar interests. He began to study with them, offering his help in subjects where he excelled, especially math. This newfound camaraderie lifted his spirits and provided a support network that he had previously lacked. One afternoon, while Lucas was helping a classmate with math, he overheard some students discussing their struggles with the subject. Remembering his own past hesitations, he decided to seize the opportunity to extend a helping hand. Hey, if anyone wants to study together, I'd be happy to help. I know math can be challenging, he offered, a smile on his face. The surprise on his classmates' faces was evident, but soon they were expressing gratitude. "Really? That would be awesome," one of them replied, a bright smile breaking across their face. In that moment, Lucas realized that he had not only found his voice, but he also had the power to uplift others in the process. He had transformed from the boy who felt invisible to someone who could make a difference, however small it might seem. As he walked home that day, Lucas felt a sense of pride in himself. He knew that challenges would always be a part of life, but he had learned to face them with courage and resilience. With the support of his father, friends, and even his teacher, he was ready to embrace whatever came next. Lucas was determined to continue his journey, not just for himself, but for others who might feel like they were struggling in silence. He wanted to be a beacon of encouragement, showing that with support and determination, anyone could rise above their challenges and find their place in the world. Faced with the reality that her actions could lead to serious consequences, Mrs. Martins felt a heavy weight of regret settle on her shoulders. As she sat in the principal's office, surrounded by Dr. Silva and Mr. Thompson, the full impact of her words began to sink in. It was more than just a verbal misstep. It was a betrayal of her role as an educator, someone who was supposed to uplift and inspire her students. The thought that her behavior had led to Lucas feeling humiliated and isolated gnawed at her conscience. Looking down at her hands, Mrs. Martins took a deep breath. "I need to be honest," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "I've always prided myself on being a fair teacher, but I can see now that my words were not just unkind, they were biased. I allowed my frustrations to cloud my judgment, and in doing so, I failed to recognize Lucas for who he truly is, an exceptional student." Dr. Silva nodded, appreciating her candidness. "It's important to acknowledge that, Mrs. Martins. Our students rely on us not just for knowledge, but for guidance and encouragement. They deserve to feel valued in the classroom." As the conversation continued, Mrs. Martins found herself reflecting deeply on her teaching practices. "I've been under a lot of pressure this year with the curriculum changes, and I let that stress seep into my interactions with students. But that's no excuse," she admitted, her voice gaining strength. "I realize now that I have a responsibility to create an environment where every student feels safe to express themselves." Mr. Thompson interjected, "This is a pivotal moment for all of us. We can use this experience to foster growth, not just for Lucas, but for you as an EDU, Cator, and for our entire school community." Dr. Silva leaned in, wanting to ensure that this wasn't just a moment of acknowledgement, but a step toward real change. "Mrs. Martins, I want to see a commitment from you to change your approach in the classroom. This isn't just about Lucas. It's about raising awareness and ensuring that all students feel respected and valued." Mrs. Martins felt a surge of determination. "I commit to that. I want to attend workshops on bias and inclusive teaching practices. I need to learn how to create a more supportive environment. I understand now that my words carry weight, and I must wield that power responsibly." The conversation shifted into a brainstorming session where all three discussed potential strategies for improving classroom dynamics. Mrs. Martins suggested implementing a circle time at the beginning of each class, where students could share their thoughts and feelings in a safe space. She proposed creating a classroom charter, developed collaboratively with students, that outlined expectations for respect and encouragement. "That sounds like a fantastic idea," Mr. Thompson said, visibly pleased. "Empowering students to have a say in their learning environment will help cultivate a sense of ownership and responsibility," Dr. Silva added. "Moreover, I think it would be beneficial to incorporate peer mentoring into your classroom. Having students support one another can not only enhance their learning experience, but also strengthen their bonds." As they discussed these initiatives, Mrs. Martins felt a renewed sense of purpose. She realized that her role extended far beyond imparting knowledge. It was about shaping young minds, fostering confidence, and building resilience. After a lengthy discussion, the meeting concluded with a sense of optimism. Mrs. Martins left with a clear understanding of the impact she could have on her students' lives and the importance of self-reflection in her journey as an educator. The days that followed were transformative for both Lucas and Mrs. Martins. As Lucas returned to school, he noticed subtle changes in the classroom atmosphere. Mrs. Martins greeted her students with warmth and enthusiasm, her approach noticeably softer and more encouraging. During one of their first circle time sessions, Lucas found the courage to share his thoughts. "I used to feel scared to speak up in class because I thought I'd be judged. But now I feel like we can all support each other," he said, glancing at his classmates. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Students began to share their own experiences, fostering a newfound camaraderie among them. Mrs. Martins guided the discussion, highlighting the importance of empathy and understanding. Through these initiatives, Mrs. Martins began to see Lucas in a new light. She recognized his potential not only as a student, but as a leader among his peers. She encouraged him to help facilitate some of the circle time discussions, seeing how his confidence had blossomed since their meeting. One day, as the class was wrapping up a particularly engaging discussion about teamwork, Mrs. Martins addressed the students directly. "I want to thank you all for being so open and honest during our discussions. You've taught me a lot about the importance of listening and understanding each other. I'm committed to ensuring that our classroom is a safe space for everyone." Lucas felt a surge of pride. This was a far cry from the classroom environment he had known just weeks earlier. He could see the changes taking root, and it made him feel more invested in his learning and in his classmates. As the weeks turned into months, the positive effects of the changes began to ripple throughout the school. Other teachers, inspired by Mrs. Martin's commitment to change, started to adopt similar practices in their classrooms. The principal, Mr. Thompson, organized a series of professional development workshops focused on inclusivity and bias training, encouraging all staff to reflect on their teaching methods and interactions with students. The school community began to embrace a culture of respect and support. Students who had previously been marginalized felt empowered to speak up, share their stories, and engage in their learning. Lucas became a voice for his peers, championing the importance of kindness and understanding within the classroom. Reflecting on the journey they had taken together, Mrs. Martins felt immense gratitude for the wake-up call that had sparked this change. The connection she forged with Lucas and the other students transformed not only her teaching, but also her understanding of the impact educators can have on their students' lives. One afternoon, as the school year neared its end, Mrs. Martins decided to host a classroom celebration to recognize the growth they had all experienced. She invited parents, teachers, and students to come together to share their accomplishments and the initiatives they had implemented. During the celebration, Lucas stood in front of his classmates, parents, and teachers, feeling a sense of belonging that he had never experienced before. "I just want to say thank you to Mrs. Martins and everyone here. We've all grown so much this year, and I think it's because we learned to support each other," he said, his voice steady and clear. As the audience applauded, Mrs. Martins beamed with pride. She had witnessed Lucas's transformation from a shy boy into a confident speaker, and it filled her with hope for the future of all her students. That evening, as Dr. Silva sat down to dinner with Lucas, he couldn't help but ask, "How do you feel about everything that's happened this year?" Lucas smiled, his eyes shining. "I feel like I've found my voice, Dad. And I think I can help others find theirs too." Dr. Silva felt a swell of pride for his son, knowing that their efforts had not only improved Lucas's experience, but had also ignited a movement toward a more inclusive and supportive school environment. As they shared stories and laughter over dinner, it became clear that the journey wasn't just about confronting bias. It was about building bridges of understanding, empathy, and growth, lessons that would resonate long after the school year ended. After that day, Mrs. Martins worked diligently to redeem herself. Determined to create a positive environment, she enrolled in workshops focused on bias awareness and inclusive teaching strategies. She spent hours researching best practices and sought advice from experienced educators who had successfully fostered inclusive classrooms. Her motivation stemmed not only from her desire to improve her teaching methods, but also from the profound impact her words had on Lucas and the realization that every student deserved respect and encouragement. Lucas, in turn, began to feel more valued and respected in the classroom. With Mrs. Martin's renewed commitment, he noticed subtle changes in her demeanor. Instead of a rigid authoritarian, she became more approachable and supportive. She encouraged open dialogue, welcoming students' ideas and feedback. This newfound atmosphere allowed Lucas to express himself freely, contributing to discussions and sharing his thoughts without fear of judgment. The transformation that began with that one critical conversation rippled through the entire classroom. Mutual respect started to blossom, fostering an environment where every student felt heard. Lucas, who had once considered himself invisible, began to stand out for his contributions and insights. His classmates started to recognize his intelligence and creativity, and he formed new friendships, reinforcing his sense of belonging. Mrs. Martins also introduced daily practices that promoted inclusivity. She implemented a gratitude circle at the start of each class, where students could share something positive about their day or acknowledge a peer's efforts. This simple exercise transformed the classroom dynamic. It not only built camaraderie among students, but also encouraged them to appreciate one another's strengths. Lucas found himself participating enthusiastically, sharing moments of gratitude for his classmates and the support they provided. As the school year progressed, the impact of these changes became evident beyond the walls of Mrs. Martin's classroom. Inspired by her efforts, other teachers began to reevaluate their own practices. They noticed the positive shift in student engagement and morale and were eager to incorporate similar strategies in their classes. The principal, Mr. Thompson, recognized this momentum and organized staff meetings to discuss ways to foster a more inclusive school environment. Teachers shared their experiences, and a collaborative spirit emerged, focusing on the importance of empathy and understanding. In one meeting, a science teacher spoke about a student who struggled with participation. "I noticed that ever since Mrs. Martin started her gratitude circles, my students have been more supportive of one another," she said. "I think we could implement something similar in our classes to create a stronger sense of community." Encouraged by this collective momentum, Mr. Thompson introduced school-wide initiatives aimed at promoting respect and inclusivity. He organized a diversity day, where students could celebrate their unique backgrounds through art, music, and storytelling. The event brought together families from different cultures, and the school buzzed with excitement as students showcased their heritage. Lucas eagerly participated, presenting a project about his family's Brazilian roots. He shared stories about traditional festivals and the importance of community in Brazilian culture. The audience listened intently, and Lucas felt an overwhelming sense of pride as he spoke. The event not only celebrated diversity, but also allowed students to recognize the richness of their differences. As the weeks turned into months, the school evolved into a more welcoming place. Bullying incidents decreased, and students became advocates for one another. The positive atmosphere encouraged collaboration, creativity, and an openness to learn from one another. Lucas flourished academically and socially. With his newfound confidence, he joined the school's debate club, where he could express his opinions and engage in respectful discussions. His passion for public speaking grew, and he often recalled how far he had come since that fateful day in Mrs. Martin's classroom. One afternoon, after a particularly engaging debate practice, Lucas approached Mrs. Martin's to express his gratitude. "Thank you for believing in me and helping me find my voice," he said, a sincere smile lighting up his face. "I don't think I would have joined the debate club if it hadn't been for the changes in class." Mrs. Martin smiled warmly, her heart swelling with pride. "You've always had a voice, Lucas. You just needed a space to let it shine. I'm so proud of you and all the progress you've made." As the school year came to an end, Mrs. Martins wanted to celebrate the changes they had all experienced together. She organized a classroom celebration, inviting parents and students to come together to share their accomplishments. The atmosphere was filled with joy and laughter as students showcased their projects and shared stories of growth. During the celebration, Lucas stood up to speak. "I just want to thank Mrs. Martins for creating a space where we can all be ourselves. This year has been amazing, and I feel so lucky to be part of such a supportive community," he said, his voice steady and confident. The applause that followed was thunderous. Lucas beamed with pride as he looked around the room, seeing the smiles of his classmates and their families. In that moment, he realized how much he had transformed from the timid student who once felt invisible. Dr. Silva attended the celebration, standing proudly in the back of the room. He watched as his son shared his experiences and achievements with the audience. It was a moment of validation, not just for Lucas, but for the entire community that had come together to support one another. After the event, Mrs. Martins approached Dr. Silva, her gratitude evident. "Thank you for your support during this process," she said. "It has truly changed my perspective as an educator, and I feel inspired to continue learning and growing alongside my students." Dr. Silva smiled, appreciating her sincerity. "It takes courage to acknowledge mistakes and work toward improvement. I'm proud of what you've accomplished with Lucas and the entire class." As the school year wrapped up, the positive changes that had taken root continued to flourish. The staff and students maintained the momentum they had built together, ensuring that inclusivity remained a priority in their educational practices. Mrs. Martins took on a leadership role, mentoring other teachers who sought to create more inclusive classrooms. One summer afternoon, Mrs. Martins received an email from Mr. Thompson. "We're planning a professional development workshop focused on diversity and inclusion for all staff members," he wrote. "I'd love for you to lead a session and share your experiences from this past year." Mrs. Martins felt a rush of excitement. This was an opportunity to not only reflect on her journey, but also to help others grow. She quickly responded, accepting the invitation with enthusiasm. As she prepared for the workshop, she felt a sense of purpose and responsibility. She wanted to empower her colleagues to embrace change and recognize the profound impact they could have on their students' lives. The day of the workshop arrived, and Mrs. Martin stood in front of her fellow educators, ready to share her story. She began by recounting her experience with Lucas and the lessons she had learned about bias and the importance of creating a safe space for all students. "I realized that teaching isn't just about delivering content. It's about nurturing young minds and helping them discover their potential," she said, her voice steady. "We have the power to shape our students' experiences, and it's our responsibility to ensure that they feel valued and respected in our classrooms." Her colleagues listened intently, nodding in agreement. Many shared their own stories of growth and transformation, and the atmosphere buzzed with enthusiasm. The workshop ignited a collective desire to make lasting changes within their school community. As the school year drew to a close, Lucas found himself reflecting on the journey he had taken. He had not only grown academically, but had also developed as a leader among his peers. With Mrs. Martin's support, he had discovered a passion for public speaking and advocacy. Encouraged by his experiences, Lucas decided to start a student-led initiative focused on kindness and respect within the school. He rallied his classmates to participate in Random Acts of Kindness Week, where students would perform acts of kindness for one another, spreading positivity and appreciation throughout the school. The initiative garnered overwhelming support, and students eagerly signed up to participate. They created posters, organized events, and shared their experiences on social media. The energy was infectious, and Lucas felt a renewed sense of purpose as he led his classmates in promoting a culture of kindness. The week culminated in a school-wide assembly where students shared their experiences and the impact of their kindness initiatives. Lucas stood in front of the crowd, his heart racing with excitement. "We've all experienced moments of doubt or struggle, but through our actions, we can uplift one another and create a more supportive community," he said, his voice ringing with sincerity. As the assembly concluded, the applause was deafening. Lucas felt a sense of fulfillment, knowing that their collective efforts had made a difference. The atmosphere of the school had shifted, students were more connected, and a culture of respect had taken root. In the months that followed, Lucas continued to thrive academically and socially. With his newfound confidence, he explored new opportunities, joining various clubs and engaging with different groups of students. The friendships he formed were genuine, built on mutual respect and understanding. Mrs. Martins watched Lucas grow with pride, grateful for the chance to be part of his journey. Their relationship evolved into a partnership, one where they collaborated on projects and initiatives aimed at improving the school community. They worked together on workshops and presentations, focusing on creating a lasting legacy of inclusivity and respect. The transformation of Oakwood High School became a testament to the power of change, growth, and the importance of empathy in education. Mrs. Martins, Lucas, and their peers had turned a challenging situation into an opportunity for growth, creating a ripple effect that would inspire future generations of students. As the school year came to an end, Lucas and Mrs. Martins reflected on their shared journey. They had not only learned valuable lessons about resilience and kindness, but had also forged a bond built on mutual respect and understanding. The experience had transformed them both, shaping their paths as they looked toward the future with hope and determination. Their story was a reminder that change begins with individuals willing to learn, grow, and embrace one another. And as they stood together at the conclusion of the school year, they knew that their efforts would continue to resonate within the halls of Oakwood High, inspiring countless students for years to come.
Disclaimer: this channel does not support or tolerate any form of discrimination, racism, prejudice, or violation of human rights. The stories presented here are original and created by the author with the aim of promoting reflection, awareness, and dialogue. All content is developed with respect for diversity and the dignity of all people.